The moment that would change everything came without warning or fanfare. As Margaret continued her relentless verbal assault, hurling increasingly vicious personal attacks at the stoic guard, a black Range Rover with tinted windows pulled up to the castle's VIP entrance. Most of the crowd was too focused on the unfolding drama to notice the vehicle's arrival, but Inspector Williams immediately recognized the significance of the unexpected visitor. From the Range Rover stepped a distinguished gentleman in his 60s, wearing an impeccably tailored civilian suit and carrying himself with the unmistakable bearing of someone accustomed to command. This was Colonel Sir Anthony Mitchell, retired commanding officer of the Welsh Guards and current equerry to a senior member of the royal family. More importantly, he was also Guard James Mitchell's father. Sir Anthony had been attending a private briefing at the castle when reports reached him of a significant disturbance involving one of the ceremonial guards. What he hadn't initially realized was that the guard being verbally assaulted by an unhinged tourist was his own son. When that detail was confirmed by castle security, the decorated war hero and peer of the realm had immediately excused himself from his meeting to assess the situation personally. As Sir Anthony approached the crowd, Margaret's voice reached him clearly across the courtyard. She was in the middle of what might have been her most vicious attack yet, screaming about the guard's assumed lack of education, poor family background, and general worthlessness as a human being. "You're nothing but trailer trash in a fancy uniform," she shrieked at James Mitchell. "I bet you come from some pathetic family of losers who never amounted to anything. Your father was probably some drunk who abandoned you. And your mother was probably too ashamed to show her face in public after raising such a complete failure." The crowd recoiled at this particularly cruel assault, but Margaret was beyond caring about their reaction. She was completely consumed by her need to break the guard's composure, to force some kind of response that would validate her sense of superiority and control. Sir Anthony Mitchell heard every word of this attack on his son's character and family background, and his face darkened with a cold fury that would have been familiar to anyone who had served under his command during his distinguished military career. However, rather than rushing into the situation, he maintained the same professional discipline that had made him one of the most respected officers in the British Army. Inspector Williams spotted Sir Anthony approaching and immediately moved to brief him on the situation, but he raised a hand to indicate he had heard enough. His eyes were fixed on the scene before him, watching his son endure the most sustained verbal assault either of them had ever witnessed, all while maintaining the perfect discipline and bearing that had made his father proud for 28 years. Margaret, meanwhile, had worked herself into such a frenzy that she was beginning to attract attention from castle security throughout the complex. Her voice had reached levels that were audible from hundreds of yards away, and the crowd around her had grown to include several hundred tourists and staff members, all watching in fascination and horror as this American woman attempted to destroy a British soldier's dignity. "Look at me when I'm talking to you, you worthless piece of garbage," she screamed, now so close to James Mitchell that she was practically standing on top of his post. "I'm not finished with you yet. You're going to stand there and listen while I tell you exactly what I think of pathetic losers like you and your whole miserable family." This was the moment Sir Anthony Mitchell chose to make his presence known. His voice, honed by decades of military command and carrying the unmistakable authority of the officer class, cut through Margaret's shrieking like a sword through silk. "Madam," he said, his tone cold and precise, "I believe you were discussing my family." The effect was immediate and dramatic. Margaret's voice cut off mid-shriek as she spun around to face this new challenger, her eyes wild with rage and confusion. The crowd fell silent, sensing that something significant was about to happen but not yet understanding the full implications of the distinguished gentleman's arrival. "What?" Margaret sputtered, temporarily thrown off balance by the unexpected interruption. "Who are you? What are you talking about?" Sir Anthony stepped forward with the measured pace of a man who had commanded troops in combat zones around the world. His bearing was ramrod straight, his eyes fixed on Margaret with the kind of steady gaze that had intimidated generals and politicians across 4 decades of military service. "I said I believe you were discussing my family," he repeated, his voice carrying easily across the suddenly silent courtyard. "Specifically, you were making rather detailed comments about my son's parentage, education, and family background. I thought it might be appropriate for me to clarify a few points. Margaret's face went through a series of rapid changes as her brain struggled to process this new information. The arrogant sneer that had been permanently fixed on her features began to waver as the implications of what the gentleman had said started to sink in. "Your son?" she said weakly, her voice suddenly, much smaller than it had been moments before. "Indeed," Sir Anthony replied, gesturing toward guard James Mitchell, who remained at perfect attention despite the extraordinary circumstances unfolding around his post. Guard James Mitchell of the Welsh Guards, currently serving on ceremonial duty at Windsor Castle. Perhaps you'd like to continue your assessment of his character and family background now that I'm here to provide some additional context. The crowd around them was beginning to understand what was happening, and a ripple of anticipation ran through the assembled tourists. Phones that had been recording Margaret's abusive tirade were now focused on capturing what promised to be an extraordinary confrontation between the entitled American tourist and the decorated British officer. Margaret's face had gone pale as the reality of her situation began to dawn on her. For the first time since the confrontation began, she seemed to be processing the possible consequences of her actions. But her entitled mindset was so deeply ingrained that she attempted to maintain her aggressive posture even in the face of this shocking revelation. "Well, I didn't know," she stammered, but her voice still carried a note of defiance. "He should have said something. If he's really from some important family, why didn't he speak up?" Sir Anthony's expression didn't change, but there was a subtle shift in his posture that suggested this response had not improved Margaret's situation. When he spoke again, his voice carried the kind of controlled fury that had once made enemy commanders surrender rather than face him in battle. "Madam, my son is a serving member of the British Armed Forces on ceremonial duty. He cannot, and will not break his professional discipline to engage with tourists, regardless of their behavior. The fact that you interpreted his professionalism as weakness, and his duty as an invitation for abuse, says considerably more about your character than it does about his." The crowd was now completely silent, hanging on every word of this extraordinary confrontation. Margaret was visibly wilting under Sir Anthony's steady gaze, but her entitled nature wouldn't allow her to back down completely. "I still think he was disrespectful," she said weakly. "I'm a paying tourist, and I deserve better treatment than being ignored like that." Sir Anthony took another step forward, his presence now completely dominating the space around Margaret. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried such authority that it seemed to reverberate through the courtyard. "Madam, you have spent the last 30 minutes verbally abusing my son while he performed his duty with honor and professionalism. You have insulted his service, his character, his education, and his family. You have done this in front of hundreds of witnesses while being recorded for distribution around the world. And now you suggest that he has been disrespectful to you." The weight of Sir Anthony's words seemed to physically press down on Margaret, who was now visibly trembling as the full magnitude of her situation became clear. Her daughter Emma had covered her face with her hands, apparently wishing she could disappear entirely. Who exactly are you?" Margaret whispered, though she seemed afraid to hear the answer. Sir Anthony's response would be replayed millions of times across social media in the coming days, becoming one of the most viral moments of the year. His voice remained calm and measured, but carried the weight of absolute authority as he delivered what would become known as the most devastating response to entitled behavior ever recorded. "I am Colonel Sir Anthony Mitchell, Knight Commander of the Order of the British Empire, former commanding officer of the Welsh Guards, veteran of the Falklands War, Northern Ireland, Iraq, and Afghanistan, and currently equerry to His Royal Highness. The young man you have been abusing for the past half hour is my son, a decorated veteran who has served his country with distinction in combat zones around the world before earning the honor of serving on ceremonial duty here at Windsor Castle." Margaret Thornfield's legs nearly gave out as the full impact of Sir Anthony's words hit her. She had spent 30 minutes viciously attacking the son of a knight, a war hero, a man connected directly to the royal family itself. Her face cycled through expressions of shock, horror, and dawning realization of the international incident she had just created. But Sir Anthony wasn't finished. His final words would ensure that Margaret Thornfield's name became synonymous with entitled tourist behavior around the world. Madam, you have demonstrated a level of disrespect and ignorance that brings shame not only upon yourself, but upon your country. Your behavior has been recorded and will be reviewed by appropriate authorities. I suggest you use whatever influence and connections you believe you possess to prepare for the consequences of your actions here today. With that, Sir Anthony turned away from the devastated Margaret and walked calmly toward his son's post. In a gesture that brought tears to the eyes of many in the crowd, he rendered a perfect military salute to Guard James Mitchell, who maintained his discipline even as his father honored his service in front of the assembled multitude. Margaret Thornfield was arrested 20 minutes later on charges of harassment, disturbing the peace, and interfering with military duties. The video of her encounter with Sir Anthony would be viewed over 50 million times in the first week alone, making her the most infamous entitled tourist in internet history. Guard James Mitchell continued his duty until the end of his shift, never breaking character despite having endured one of the most extraordinary confrontations in the history of royal ceremonial duty. His father's pride in his son's professionalism would be mentioned in interviews for years to come, helping to cement the story as a powerful lesson about duty, discipline, and the dangers of entitled behavior. Margaret's verbal assault reached new heights of cruelty as she circled Guard Mitchell like a predator stalking wounded prey. Her voice had taken on a shrill quality that cut through the morning air like a knife, each word carefully chosen to inflict maximum psychological damage on what she believed was a helpless target. "Look at you, standing there like a mindless robot," she continued, her face now inches from Mitchell's. "I bet you don't even have a real education. Probably dropped out of high school and joined the military because you were too stupid for anything else. This isn't a real job. You're just a tourist attraction, a living statue for people to take pictures with." The crowd around them had swelled to nearly 100 people, tourists from dozens of countries watching in stunned silence as this American woman systematically attempted to destroy a British soldier's dignity. Many in the crowd were veterans themselves, or had family members serving in various militaries around the world. The disrespect being shown to a uniformed service member was striking them as deeply wrong, but the situation was so surreal that no one quite knew how to intervene. Emma Thornfield had tears streaming down her face as she watched her mother's public meltdown reach new depths of embarrassment. She had tried repeatedly to pull Margaret away from the scene, but her mother had shrugged off every attempt with increasing violence, at one point nearly knocking her own daughter to the ground in her fury. "Mom, please," Emma whispered desperately. "Everyone's recording this. You're going to be all over the internet. Please, let's just go back to the hotel." But Margaret was completely lost in her rage, feeding off what she mistook for weakness in the silent guard before her. She had built her entire adult identity around dominating others through verbal aggression and financial intimidation, and the fact that this soldier refused to react was only making her more desperate to break him. "What's wrong with you?" she screamed, now so close to Mitchell that her spittle was landing on his uniform. "Are you deaf? Are you mute? Or are you just too pathetic to defend yourself? I've seen more backbone in a jellyfish. You're a disgrace to that uniform." Security Chief Inspector Sarah Williams had been monitoring the situation from the castle's command center through CCTV feeds, and she was now making her way through the crowd with a team of additional security personnel. Williams was a 20-year veteran of the Metropolitan Police who had handled everything from terrorist threats to royal security details, but she had rarely seen such a sustained verbal assault on a member of the ceremonial guard. As Williams approached, she could hear Margaret's voice reaching even higher decibels of abuse. The woman seemed to have an inexhaustible supply of insults and degrading comments, each one more personal and vicious than the last. "You know what you are?" Margaret shrieked, now gesticulating wildly with her designer handbag. "You're a failure. A complete and total failure as a human being. Standing here dressed up like some kind of toy soldier while real men go out and make something of themselves. I bet your own family is ashamed of you." This last comment caused a visible reaction in the crowd. Several tourists began voicing their disapproval, with one elderly British veteran stepping forward and declaring loudly, "That's quite enough, madam. That young man is serving his country with honor. But Margaret whirled on the veteran with the same viciousness she had been directing at the guard. Shut up, old man. No one asked for your opinion. Mind your own business before I have you arrested for harassment. The absurdity of a foreign tourist threatening to have a British citizen arrested in his own country might have been comical under different circumstances, but Margaret's complete disconnection from reality was becoming genuinely concerning to the security professionals monitoring the situation. Inspector Williams finally reached the inner circle of the confrontation and attempted to take control of the rapidly deteriorating situation. Her voice carried the authority of decades in law enforcement as she addressed Margaret directly. Madam, I'm Inspector Williams with Castle Security. I need you to step away from the guard immediately and come with me to resolve this situation peacefully. Margaret spun around to face this new challenger to her perceived authority, her eyes blazing with fury at what she saw as another subordinate attempting to give her orders. In her twisted worldview, everyone from the guard to the security staff to the police inspector was just another servant who needed to be reminded of their proper place in the social hierarchy. And who the hell do you think you are? Margaret screamed at Williams. Another minimum wage security guard trying to tell me what to do? I don't think so. I'm not moving anywhere until this pathetic excuse for a soldier shows me the respect I deserve. Williams had dealt with difficult individuals before, but the level of entitled aggression she was witnessing was extraordinary even by her standards. She could see that Margaret was completely beyond reason, operating in a state of rage-fueled delusion that made rational communication impossible. Madam, you're currently interfering with an active military post and verbally abusing a member of the British Armed Forces, Williams said, her voice remaining calm but firm. These are serious offenses that could result in arrest and prosecution. I'm offering you one final opportunity to walk away from this situation before it becomes a legal matter. The mention of potential arrest only served to escalate Margaret's fury to even more dangerous levels. In her mind, the very suggestion that she could face legal consequences was proof that these people had completely forgotten their place. She had spent her entire adult life using her husband's wealth and her own aggressive personality to intimidate her way out of any consequences for her behavior. And she fully expected that pattern to continue here. Legal matter, she shrieked, her voice now audible throughout most of the castle courtyard. Are you out of your mind? Do you know what kind of connections my family has? I can have you all fired with one phone call. I can have this entire place shut down. You'll be lucky if you're not all in jail by the end of the day. While Margaret continued her increasingly unhinged tirade, something remarkable was happening in the crowd around them. Tourists from various countries were beginning to organize themselves into an unofficial support network for the embattled guard. Veterans in the crowd were sharing quiet words about the young soldier's obvious professionalism under extreme pressure. Parents were explaining to their children why the guard couldn't respond to the woman's abuse, turning the incident into impromptu lessons about duty, discipline, and service. Meanwhile, the viral video footage being captured by dozens of phones was already beginning to circulate on social media platforms. The hashtags #RoyalGuardAbuse and #EntitledTourist were starting to trend as people around the world reacted with outrage to the unprovoked attack on the ceremonial guard. But the most shocking part of the story was yet to be revealed. As Margaret continued her verbal assault, screaming increasingly personal and vicious insults at Guard Mitchell, none of the spectators could have predicted the incredible twist that was about to completely transform the entire situation. Inspector Williams had been quietly speaking into her radio, coordinating with additional security personnel and requesting backup from the local police. The situation had clearly moved beyond what Castle Security could handle alone, and formal charges would likely need to be filed against the increasingly unstable American tourist. Margaret, meanwhile, had moved on to attacking what she assumed was the guard's background, education, and family situation. Her insults became increasingly creative and cruel as she searched for any angle that might finally provoke the reaction she was desperately seeking. I bet you come from some pathetic working-class family that's probably ashamed of having raised such a failure, she screamed. Your parents probably cry themselves to sleep every night knowing they raised a son who's nothing more than a living mannequin in a ridiculous costume. You're a waste of oxygen, a complete and total disappointment to everyone who's ever known you. The crowd's reaction to this particularly vicious attack was immediate and audible. Gasps of shock and anger rippled through the assembled tourists, with many openly expressing their disgust at the woman's behavior. Several people began calling out for her to stop, while others started chanting support for the guard. But Margaret was completely oblivious to the growing hostility of the crowd around her. She was locked in what she saw as a battle of wills with the silent soldier, convinced that if she just found the right combination of insults and threats, she would finally break his professional composure and assert her dominance over the situation. "What's it going to take to get a reaction out of you?" she screamed, now practically dancing with rage in front of Mitchell's post. "Are you going to stand there like a coward forever? Are you going to let some American woman make you look like a fool in front of all these people? Where's your pride? Where's your backbone? Do you even have any fight in you at all?" Guard Mitchell's eyes flickered almost imperceptibly, a tiny movement that only the most observant spectators might have caught. For just a moment, something passed across his features that suggested the verbal assault was having a deeper impact than his professional exterior revealed. But his discipline held firm, his training absolute, his commitment to his duty unwavering despite the sustained psychological attack. The tension in the courtyard was now palpable, with hundreds of people holding their breath as they watched this extraordinary confrontation unfold. Many were beginning to wonder how much more abuse the young soldier could endure before something gave way. Others were growing increasingly angry at the lack of intervention, wondering why someone didn't simply arrest the clearly unstable woman and end her vicious assault. But none of them could have predicted what was about to happen next. The shocking twist that would completely transform the narrative was just moments away, and when it finally came, it would leave everyone in the courtyard, including Margaret Thornfield herself, speechless with amazement. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of Windsor Castle's public courtyard as tourists gathered for the traditional changing of the guard ceremony. Among the crowd stood Margaret Thornfield, a woman whose expensive handbag and designer clothes spoke of wealth, but whose pinched expression and aggressive posture hinted at something far less pleasant brewing beneath the surface. Margaret had arrived at the castle with her teenage daughter Emma, expecting the red carpet treatment she believed her social status deserved. As a prominent real estate developer's wife from Connecticut, she was accustomed to getting her way through sheer force of personality and financial intimidation. Today, however, she was about to encounter something her money and attitude couldn't control. The royal guard stood at attention in their iconic red tunics and bearskin hats, their faces stoic and professional despite the growing crowd of tourists snapping photos and chattering excitedly. These weren't costume performers or actors. They were highly trained soldiers of the British Army, serving one of the most prestigious ceremonial duties in the world. Each guard had earned their position through rigorous training, unwavering discipline, and exemplary service record. Guard James Mitchell stood at his post near the main entrance, his rifle held perfectly still as visitors walked past. At 28 years old, Mitchell was a decorated veteran who had served 2 tours in Afghanistan with the Welsh Guards before being selected for ceremonial duties at Windsor Castle. His military record included commendations for bravery under fire and exceptional leadership during combat operations. What the tourists didn't know was that beneath his ceremonial uniform lay the heart of a man who had seen real warfare and understood the weight of duty and sacrifice. Margaret's problems began when she tried to pose for a photo directly in front of Mitchell's post, ignoring the clearly marked boundaries and the polite request from castle staff to maintain appropriate distance. When a security officer gently informed her that she needed to step back behind the designated line, Margaret's face flushed with indignation. "Excuse me," she snapped, her voice carrying across the courtyard. "Do you know who I am? My husband owns half of Connecticut, and we've donated more money to British charities than you'll see in your lifetime. I think I deserve a proper photo opportunity." The security officer, a patient man named David who had dealt with difficult tourists for 15 years, maintained his professional demeanor. "I understand you'd like a good photo, madam, but these boundaries are in place for everyone's safety and to allow the guards to perform their duties properly. There's an excellent viewing area just behind the rope where you can get wonderful pictures. Margaret's daughter Emma tugged at her mother's sleeve, clearly embarrassed by the growing scene. Mom, please, it's fine. We can take pictures from over there. Look, other people are getting great shots. But Margaret was beyond reason now. The perceived slight had triggered something deep within her entitled psyche, and she was determined to assert what she believed was her rightful dominance over the situation. She had spent her entire adult life using her husband's wealth and her own aggressive personality to bulldoze through obstacles, and she wasn't about to be denied by what she saw as mere servants and toy soldiers. I am not moving, she declared loudly, planting herself even more firmly in the restricted area. This is ridiculous. These guards are just for show anyway. They're basically fancy mannequins in funny hats. I've paid good money for this tour, and I'll stand wherever I damn well please. The crowd around them began to take notice, with phones discreetly appearing as people sensed drama unfolding. Guard Mitchell remained perfectly still, his training taking over as he maintained his position despite the growing disturbance mere feet away. His eyes stayed fixed straight ahead, but his peripheral vision caught every movement, every gesture of the increasingly agitated woman. David, the security officer, tried one more diplomatic approach. Madam, I really must insist that you step behind the barrier. The guards are on active duty, and interfering with their post is actually a criminal offense under British law. I'm trying to help you avoid any legal complications. This was exactly the wrong thing to say to someone like Margaret Thornfield. The mention of legal consequences and criminal offenses only served to escalate her fury to dangerous levels. In her mind, the very suggestion that she could face legal trouble was not just insulting. It was proof that these people didn't understand their place in the social hierarchy. Legal complications, she shrieked, her voice now carrying across the entire courtyard and causing dozens of tourists to stop and stare. Are you threatening me? Do you have any idea what kind of lawyers my family has on retainer? I could buy this entire castle and turn it into a parking lot if I wanted to. Emma had gone pale with embarrassment, whispering urgent pleas for her mother to calm down. But Margaret was past listening to anyone. The crowd had grown larger, with tourists from various countries watching in fascination and horror as this American woman created an international incident over a photograph. Guard Mitchell's training kicked into high gear as he assessed the situation developing at his post. While maintaining his ceremonial stance, he was mentally cataloging the woman's movements, her aggressive body language, and the escalating nature of her verbal assault on the security staff. Years of military experience had taught him to recognize when a situation was moving from mere disturbance toward potential physical confrontation. Margaret suddenly wheeled around to face Mitchell directly. Her fury now focused on the silent soldier who had become the symbol of everything she felt was keeping her from getting her way. Her face was red with rage, spittle flying as she unleashed a torrent of abuse that would have made seasoned drill sergeants uncomfortable. "And you," she screamed, pointing an accusatory finger inches from Mitchell's face. "Standing there like some kind of robot. You're nothing but a glorified doorman in a ridiculous costume. I bet you've never seen real combat in your life, you pathetic excuse for a soldier." The crowd gasped audibly at this assault on a member of the British military, but Mitchell remained statue still, his discipline absolute despite the personal nature of the attack. His breathing remained controlled, his grip on his rifle steady, his eyes focused on the horizon beyond the raging woman's head. But Margaret wasn't finished. She had found her target, and like a predator sensing weakness in what she mistakenly believed was helpless prey, she pressed her attack with increasing viciousness. Her voice rose to a near shriek as she continued her tirade. "What's the matter, toy soldier? Cat got your tongue? Or are you too stupid to speak? I bet you're just some unemployed loser who couldn't get a real job, so they dressed you up like a doll and stuck you here to entertain tourists. My gardener has more dignity than you do." The insults rained down with increasing intensity, each one designed to provoke a response, to break the guard's professional composure. Margaret had spent years perfecting the art of verbal intimidation, finding exactly the right words to make service workers, retail employees, and anyone else she deemed beneath her social status crack under pressure. Security personnel were now converging on the scene from multiple directions, but they moved carefully, not wanting to escalate the situation into something even worse. David continued his attempts at de-escalation, but Margaret was completely lost in her rage-fueled performance. The tourists around them were no longer just watching. Many were recording, their phones capturing every moment of what was rapidly becoming an international incident. The footage would soon be spreading across social media platforms. But, in this moment, Margaret was oblivious to anything except her desire to dominate and humiliate the silent soldier before her. "I'm talking to you, you worthless piece of garbage," she screamed, moving even closer to Mitchell's position. "Look at me when I'm speaking to you. Show some respect. I could have you fired with one phone call. I could have this entire operation shut down." Guard Mitchell's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the only sign that the verbal assault was having any effect at all. But his training held firm, his discipline unbreakable despite the increasingly personal and vicious nature of the attack. He had faced enemy fire in Afghanistan, had seen friends die in combat, had made split-second decisions that meant the difference between life and death for his fellow soldiers. A privileged tourist having a tantrum, no matter how vicious her words, was not going to break him. But Margaret Thornfield was far from finished with her assault, and the shocking twist that would change everything was still moments away from being revealed. The crowd continued to grow, the cameras kept rolling, and the tension in the historic courtyard reached a breaking point that would soon explode in the most unexpected way imaginable.